The gunshot echoed across the dusty street of Abiquiu, New Mexico, and Garrett Ashford watched as the widow in black sent a whiskey bottle spinning into 1,000 glittering pieces, her rifle steady as mountain stone. It was late August 1882, and the heat shimmered off the sun-baked adobe buildings that lined the main street. Garrett had ridden into this small settlement 3 days prior, looking for honest work after a long cattle drive from Texas, had left him with enough money to consider settling somewhere permanent. He had heard Abiquiu was peaceful, populated mostly by farmers and families trying to make decent lives in the New Mexico territory. What he had not expected was to find himself standing in the middle of the street, hat in hand, watching the most captivating woman he had ever seen reload her Winchester with practiced precision. Theresa Valdez had been widowed for 8 months. Her husband had died in a mining accident up north, leaving her with a small ranch on the outskirts of town, 40 head of cattle, and a reputation for being harder than the desert rocks. She was 24 years old, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and eyes the color of strong coffee. When she turned those eyes on Garrett now, he felt something shift in his chest, though he could not quite name it. "You planning to stand there gawking all day, cowboy, or are you going to make good on that boast I heard you making in the saloon last night?" Her voice carried across the space between them, clear and challenging. Garrett felt his face warm. He had indeed been drinking the previous evening, loosened up by whiskey and the friendly atmosphere at the cantina. Someone had mentioned the widow's shooting skills, and Garrett, never one to back down from a challenge and perhaps too confident in his own abilities, had suggested loudly that no woman could outshoot him. He had won competitions in San Antonio and El Paso. He had hunted game across 3 territories. He was, by all accounts, an excellent marksman. But watching Theresa Valdez shoot now, he was beginning to suspect he had made a terrible miscalculation. "I am a man of my word, madam," he called back, settling his hat on his head and walking toward where she stood. The small crowd that had gathered pressed closer, sensing entertainment. In a town as quiet as Abiquiu, a shooting contest was worth abandoning afternoon chores. Theresa set down her rifle and crossed her arms, studying him with an expression that gave nothing away. Up close, Garrett could see the fine lines of grief etched around her eyes, the set of her jaw that spoke of someone who had learned to be strong because life had given her no other choice. She wore a simple black dress, dusty at the hem, and boots that had seen hard use. She was not classically beautiful in the way of the painted ladies in the saloons or the delicate daughters of wealthy ranchers, but there was something magnetic about her, something that made it impossible for Garrett to look away. "Rules are simple," she said. 6 targets. We take turns. Miss a shot, you lose. If we both hit all 6, we move the targets back and keep going until someone misses." "Fair enough." Garrett extended his hand. Garrett Ashford. She looked at his hand for a long moment before shaking it firmly. "Theresa Valdez." "Though I suppose you already knew that, seeing as how you were discussing my skills without having met me." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I apologize for that, madam. I spoke without thinking. Most men do." She released his hand and turned to the crowd. "Miguel, set up the targets." A young man who could not have been more than 16 scrambled to comply, setting 6 tin cans on fence posts at various distances. The closest was perhaps 30 feet away, the farthest closer to 60. Garrett assessed the challenge and felt confident. These were reasonable distances, and the afternoon sun was behind them, not in their eyes. "Ladies first," he said, gesturing for Theresa to take the opening shot. She picked up her Winchester, and Garrett noticed how comfortable she seemed with the weapon, how it fit against her shoulder like it belonged there. She aimed and fired in one smooth motion, and the first can flew off its post. The second and third followed just as quickly. She paused before the fourth, adjusting her stance slightly, then fired. Another hit. The fifth was the farthest target, but she took it down without hesitation. The sixth can practically exploded under the force of her shot. The crowd applauded, and Theresa lowered her rifle, her expression unchanged. She looked at Garrett expectantly. He picked up his own rifle, a reliable weapon that had served him well for 5 years. He could feel the weight of all those watching eyes, but he pushed the awareness aside and focused on the targets. Miguel had reset them, and Garrett took his time with the first shot. The can jumped and fell. He hit the second and third with equal precision. The fourth target required a slight adjustment for a crosswind he had not noticed before, but he compensated and made the shot. The fifth went down clean. The sixth required every bit of skill he possessed, but he hit it square. The crowd cheered, and Garrett found himself grinning despite his nervousness. Theresa nodded, something like approval in her eyes. "Not bad, Cowboy." Miguel moved them back 20 feet. They went another round, then another. Theresa hit every target with mechanical consistency, never showing strain or doubt. Garrett matched her shot for shot, but he could feel his concentration beginning to waver. It was not just the difficulty of the shooting or the pressure of the watching crowd. It was the woman herself, the way she moved, the quiet confidence she radiated. He found himself wanting to impress her, wanting to see her smile, wanting something he could not quite articulate. On the fourth round, with the targets now more than 80 feet away and the sun beginning to sink toward the western horizon, Garrett took his shot at the fifth can and missed by a hair's breadth. The bullet pinged off the fence post, and the can remained standing. The crowd let out a collective gasp, then broke into applause for Theresa's victory. She lowered her rifle and turned to him, and for the first time since the contest began, he saw her smile. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges and revealing the woman beneath the armor of grief and solitude. Something happened in that moment, something Garrett would later describe as feeling like being struck by lightning. Looking at Theresa Valdez in the golden afternoon light, her rifle in her hands and that small smile on her lips, he knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend the rest of his life learning to make her smile like that. The words came out before he could stop them, propelled by instinct and a bone-deep certainty that surprised even him. "Marry me now." The crowd fell silent. Theresa's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of complete shock. She stared at him like he had lost his mind, and perhaps he had. "What did you just say?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Garrett set down his rifle and took a step toward her, his heart pounding. This was insane. This was the most reckless thing he had ever done, and he had once jumped off a moving train to avoid a gang of bandits. But the words were out now, and looking at her face, he could not bring himself to take them back. "I said marry me. I know it sounds crazy, I know we just met, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He spoke quickly, aware that he sounded like a madman but unable to stop. "I am 26 years old. I have $1,000 saved from cattle drives and ranch work. I can provide for you. I can work your land, help with your cattle, fix whatever needs fixing. I am not asking you to love me right away. I am just asking you to give me the chance to prove I can be the kind of man worthy of you." Theresa continued to stare at him, her rifle still in her hands. The crowd had pressed closer, everyone straining to hear her response. Garrett could see old women whispering behind their hands, men shaking their heads at his boldness, younger folks watching with wide-eyed fascination. "You are out of your mind," Theresa said finally, but her voice shook slightly, and Garrett thought he detected something other than pure rejection in her tone. "Maybe," he admitted, "but that does not make it less true. You just beat me in a fair contest, and you did it with more skill and grace than any shooter I have ever seen, man or woman. You are strong and capable and beautiful, and I would count myself the luckiest man alive if you would even consider my offer." She shook her head slowly, but he noticed she had not yet refused outright. "You do not know anything about me. I am not some prize to be won in a shooting contest." "No, you are not," he agreed quickly. "You are a woman who has survived loss and come out stronger for it. You are someone who works her own land and takes care of herself. You are someone who does not suffer fools, which I appreciate because I try my best not to be one. And I want to know more. I want to know everything." But I needed to say those words now because I have a feeling if I waited, I might lose my nerve, and I would spend the rest of my life regretting it. A long silence stretched between them. Garrett could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel sweat trickling down his back that had nothing to do with the August heat. He had laid himself completely bare in front of half the town, and he could not bring himself to regret it. Theresa finally lowered her rifle completely and took a step closer to him. When she spoke, her voice was low enough that only he could hear. "My ranch is struggling. My husband's death left debts I am still paying off. Half the men in this territory think I should sell out and move back east to live with relatives. The other half are waiting for me to fail so they can buy my land cheap. I work from dawn until dark every single day, and some nights I am so tired I fall asleep in my clothes." That is the reality of what you would be signing up for, Garrett Ashford, not some romantic notion of ranch life and a grateful woman. He met her eyes steadily. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas. My parents died when I was 17, and I worked cattle drives for 9 years to save enough money to start fresh. I know what hard work looks like, and I am not afraid of it. I am not looking for easy or comfortable. I am looking for a place to belong and someone to build a life with. If you will let me, I would like it to be here with you." Something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been hope or might have been fear. "You are serious. You are actually serious. As serious as I have ever been about anything." She bit her lip, glancing at the watching crowd, then back at him. "I cannot give you an answer right now. This is too sudden, too unexpected. But if you are truly sincere, if this is not just the heat talking or some impulse you will regret by morning, then come to my ranch tomorrow at dawn. It is 2 miles north of town, past the Cottonwood Grove. You will recognize it by the split rail fence and the red barn. Come ready to work. Spend the day, see what the reality of my life looks like, and then we will talk." It was not an acceptance, but it was not a rejection either. Garrett felt a surge of hope so strong it nearly knocked him breathless. "I will be there," he promised. "Thank you for giving me this chance." She nodded once, then turned and walked away, carrying her rifle with the same easy competence she had shown throughout the contest. The crowd parted for her, and Garrett watched until she disappeared around the corner toward where the horses were tethered. The moment she was out of sight, the questions started. Everyone wanted to know what he was thinking, whether he was drunk, if he had bet money on the contest and lost his mind when he lost. Garrett answered as politely as he could, deflecting most of the inquiries, until finally an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes pulled him aside. "That was quite a declaration, young man," the man said. He introduced himself as Father Domingo, the priest who served Abiquiu and the surrounding settlements. "I suppose it was," Garrett agreed. "I am not usually that impulsive." "Theresa Valdez is a good woman," Father Domingo said carefully. "She has been through a great deal of pain. Her husband was a good man, but he was also a dreamer who made poor financial decisions. She loved him anyway, and his death nearly broke her. She has been rebuilding herself piece by piece for these past months. If you are serious about courting her, you need to understand that she will not give her heart easily again. I understand, Garrett said. I am not expecting easy, I am just hoping for a chance. The priest studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Then I will pray for you both. God works in mysterious ways, and perhaps he brought you to Abiquiu for exactly this reason. Garrett spent the rest of the day purchasing supplies he thought might be useful at her ranch. He bought work gloves, leather cord for repairs, good tobacco that could be a gift if the moment seemed right. He also bought a small jar of honey, remembering his mother saying that honey was good for making bread and could be a thoughtful offering. He was operating on pure instinct now, driven by the feeling that had seized him when he had looked at Theresa's smiling face. That night, he could barely sleep. He lay in the narrow bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their interaction. Her voice, her stance, the way she had looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through his bravado to the truth beneath. He had meant every word he said. That certainty was the most terrifying and exhilarating thing he had ever experienced. Dawn came with a spectacular sunrise that painted the New Mexico sky in shades of pink and gold. Garrett dressed in his sturdiest work clothes, strapped on his gun belt out of habit, and gathered the supplies he had purchased. He saddled his horse, a reliable gray gelding named Smoke, and rode north out of town as the first rays of sun spilled over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the distance. He found the ranch exactly where Theresa had described it. The split-rail fence needed repairs in several places, he noted immediately. The barn was indeed painted red, though the color had faded and peeled in the harsh sun. There were cattle in the distance, grazing on sparse grass. The main house was small but well built, adobe with a wooden porch that faced east to catch the morning light. Theresa was already outside, working on a section of fence near the barn. She looked up when she heard his horse, and Garrett saw a surprise flash across her face, as though part of her had not expected him to actually show up. "Good morning," he called, dismounting and tying Smoke to the fence. "Where would you like me to start?" She straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt. "You actually came. I said I would." Something softened in her expression just a fraction. "Most men say a lot of things they do not mean." "I am not most men," Garrett said simply. "Now what needs doing?" For the next several hours, Garrett worked harder than he had worked in months. Theresa set him to repairing the fence, and he threw himself into the task with focused determination. The wood was sun-bleached and cracked in places, requiring careful replacement. He worked methodically, aware of Theresa moving around the ranch doing her own chores, occasionally glancing his way. Around mid-morning, she brought him a cup of water and some bread with butter. He accepted gratefully, noting the quality of the bread. She had baked it herself, obviously, and it was some of the best he had tasted. "You are good at this," she observed, nodding at the fence. "Grew up doing it," he replied. "My father always said a strong fence meant strong cattle." "Your father was a rancher," he was. "Small spread in East Texas." "Nothing fancy, but it was home." He paused, then added, "They died in a yellow fever outbreak. I was 17. Her expression shifted to sympathy. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible." "It was, but it also taught me that life does not wait for you to be ready. Sometimes you just have to keep moving forward, even when it hurts." She was quiet for a moment, and he wondered if she was thinking about her own loss. "What made you leave Texas?" "Nothing left for me there after they passed. The ranch was mortgaged and I could not keep up the payments alone. I sold what I could, paid what debts existed, and took to the cattle trails. Figured I would save up enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere without memories on every corner. And you chose New Mexico? He met her eyes directly. I chose yesterday afternoon, standing in that street, watching you smile after winning a shooting contest. Color rose in her cheeks and she looked away. You should not say things like that. Why not? They are true. Because true or not, they complicate things. She stood abruptly. Keep working on the fence. I need to check on the cattle. She walked away before he could respond, and Garrett returned to his work with a small smile. She had not told him to leave. That seemed like progress. By afternoon, he had finished the fence repairs and moved on to checking the barn. The structure was sound, but there were several places where the roof needed patching. He climbed up with some spare wood and tar he found in the barn, working carefully in the intense heat. Theresa returned as the sun was beginning its descent, looking tired and dusty. She found him on the roof and stopped, shading her eyes to look up at him. You are fixing the roof now. It needed fixing, he called down. Should keep the rain out better come fall. She shook her head, but he thought he detected the hint of a smile. Come down from there before you kill yourself. I have supper cooking. That stopped him cold. You are inviting me to supper. Do not make a big thing of it. You worked hard today. The least I can do is feed you before you ride back to town. Garrett climbed down carefully, his muscles protesting after the long day of work. He followed Theresa into the house, which was neat and spare but comfortable. There was a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, and what he assumed were sleeping quarters beyond a closed door. The furniture was simple but well made. There were no decorations, no feminine touches that he would have expected. It looked like the home of someone who had put sentiment aside in favor of pure survival. Theresa ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the small table along with more of that excellent bread. They sat across from each other, and for a few minutes there was only the sound of eating. Finally, Theresa spoke. You did good work today, more than I expected, honestly. I meant what I said yesterday. I am not afraid of hard work. I can see that. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. But work is not all there is to a marriage, Garrett. There has to be more than just 2 people who can labor side by side. I agree completely, he said. But I figured proving I could pull my weight was a good place to start. The rest, the important stuff that takes time, that takes 2 people being willing to be honest with each other and patient while they figure things out. And you think you can be patient? There was a challenge in her voice. You proposed marriage after knowing me for all of 5 minutes. He set down his spoon and leaned forward. I proposed marriage because something in me recognized something in you, and I was afraid if I did not speak up right then, I would lose the chance forever. But I am not expecting you to marry me tomorrow or next week or even next month. What I am asking for is the chance to court you properly, to show you I mean what I say, to give us both time to figure out if what I felt in that moment was real or just madness. She studied him across the table, her dark eyes searching his face. What if it was just madness? Then I will have spent time with an extraordinary woman and learned something about myself. That would not be a waste, he paused. But I do not think it was madness. I think maybe sometimes we know things before our minds can catch up to explain them. Call it instinct or fate or just plain luck. Whatever it is, I am asking you to trust it enough to see where it leads. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Finally, Theresa stood and began clearing the dishes. You can come back tomorrow, she said quietly, if you want. There is always work to be done and I could use the help, but I am not promising anything beyond that. I need time, Garrett. Time to see if you really are who you seem to be or if this is all just a good performance. He stood as well, his heart lightening. That is all I am asking for, time and a chance. She walked him to the door, and they stood on the porch as the last light faded from the sky. The desert night was coming alive with sounds, insects chirping, a distant coyote call. "Thank you for today," Garrett said, "for giving me the opportunity to show up." "Thank you for actually showing up," she replied. "Most men do not." He wanted to ask about her husband, about what had happened in her marriage that made her so wary, but he knew it was too soon. Instead, he simply tipped his hat to her and walked to where Smoke waited patiently. The ride back to town felt different than the ride out that morning. He was exhausted and sore, but there was a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with physical comfort. He had worked on her land, eaten at her table, and been granted permission to return. It was a start. Over the next 3 weeks, Garrett fell into a routine. He would rise before dawn, ride out to Theresa's ranch and work until sunset. Then he would return to town, eat a quick meal, and collapse into bed. The work was hard and constant. He repaired buildings, mended fences, helped move cattle to better grazing areas, dug out a section of irrigation ditch that had become clogged with debris. He learned the rhythms of Theresa's ranch, the way the land breathed and shifted with the seasons. More importantly, he learned about Theresa herself. She was deeply proud, he discovered, almost to the point of stubbornness. She hated asking for help with anything, which made it all the more significant when she did. She was also incredibly competent. She could treat a sick cow, deliver a breech calf, and track a lost steer across miles of desert. She had taught herself accounting to manage the ranch's finances, and could negotiate with cattle buyers with the same steely determination she brought to everything else. But there were softer moments, too. Garrett discovered that she loved the early morning, that quiet time before the sun rose when the world was still cool and peaceful. She would often sit on her porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sky change colors. He learned that she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. She could imitate the way the town banker spoke with devastating accuracy, and her impression of the gossiping women at the general store was hilarious. She asked him questions too, slowly pulling out the stories of his life. She wanted to know about his parents, about growing up in Texas, about the cattle drives he had worked. He told her about sleeping under the stars for months at a time, about the characters he had met on the trail, about the time a flash flood had nearly swept away the entire herd, and how they had worked for 20 hours straight to save the cattle. They began eating supper together every evening before he rode back to town. Those meals became the highlight of his day. They would talk about the work that had been done, what still needed doing, and gradually, about more personal things. Theresa told him about growing up in a small village south of Abiquiu, about her parents who had died when she was young, about being raised by an aunt who had been kind but distant. "I met my husband when I was 19, she said one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. He was charming and full of big dreams. He wanted to make a fortune, to give me everything I had never had. I loved him for that, for the way he believed anything was possible. But the dreams did not work out." Garrett asked gently. He was not practical, she said, and there was sorrow in her voice, but also a kind of resigned acceptance. He would invest in schemes that made no sense, chase opportunities that were clearly too good to be true. I tried to be the practical one to keep us grounded, but he would get upset when I questioned his plans. He thought I did not believe in him. That must have been hard. It was. I loved him, truly loved him, but I also resented him sometimes. And then he died, and I was left with all this debt and a ranch that was falling apart, and I felt so angry at him for leaving me with this mess. And then I felt guilty for being angry because he was dead, and it was not his fault the mine collapsed. She paused, her voice thick. It has taken me these 8 months to even begin to sort through all of those feelings." Garrett reached over and took her hand. She did not pull away, and he felt the calluses on her palm, the evidence of how hard she had worked to hold on to what her husband had left behind. "You are allowed to feel all of those things," he said quietly. "Love is not simple, and grief is even less so. The fact that you stayed here, that you fought to keep this place running, that says everything about your strength and your loyalty." She looked at him, and in the starlight he saw tears glinting in her eyes. "Why are you so understanding? Most men would tell me to stop dwelling on the past and move on. Because moving on does not mean forgetting or pretending things were different than they were. It just means learning to carry the past without letting it crush you." He squeezed her hand gently. "And because I want you to know that whatever you are feeling, whatever you are working through, I am here. I am not going anywhere." She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, so softly he almost missed it, "I am starting to believe you." It was a turning point. Over the days that followed, Garrett felt the walls around Theresa's heart beginning to lower just slightly. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely. She started asking his opinion on ranch decisions, actually considering his input rather than just tolerating his presence. She began touching him in small ways, her hand on his arm when she wanted to show him something, her shoulder brushing his as they walked side by side. One evening, about 5 weeks after the shooting contest, they were working together to bring in the cattle before a storm. The sky had been threatening all afternoon, massive thunderheads building over the mountains. The air felt electric, charged with the promise of rain that the desert desperately needed. They managed to get the cattle into the near pasture just as the first drops began to fall. Within seconds, the sky opened up, releasing a downpour that soaked them both instantly. They ran for the barn, laughing as the rain pelted down and burst through the door dripping and breathless. "That was close," Theresa gasped, pushing wet hair out of her face. Her dress clung to her, and she was shivering slightly despite the warmth of the day. Garrett grabbed a horse blanket and draped it around her shoulders. "You should get to the house, get into dry clothes." But the rain was coming down so hard it was like a solid wall of water between the barn and the house. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning flashed bright enough to illuminate the interior of the barn. "I think we are stuck here for a bit," Theresa said, hugging the blanket around herself. They settled into the hay, close together for warmth. Garrett could feel her shivering against his side, and he put his arm around her, rubbing her shoulder to generate heat. She did not protest, instead leaning into him. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything. For showing up that first morning, for coming back every day, for being patient with me." "You do not have to thank me for that," he said. "Being here with you has been the best part of my day, every single day." She tilted her head up to look at him, and in the dim light of the barn, with the rain drumming on the roof and the smell of wet earth all around them, Garrett felt that same certainty he had felt the day of the shooting contest. This was where he was meant to be. This woman was who he was meant to be with. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words coming out raw and honest. "I think maybe I started falling that first day, but now I am certain. I love the way you face every challenge head-on. I love your strength and your pride and your stubborn refusal to give up. I love the way you look at the sunrise and the sound of your laugh when I manage to catch you off guard. I love you, Theresa Valdez, and I will keep loving you whether you ever feel the same or not." Her eyes widened, and for a moment he thought he had pushed too far, too fast. But then her expression crumbled, and tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the rain water still dripping from her hair. "I am so scared," she whispered. "I am terrified of letting myself feel this way again. What if something happens to you? What if I lose you too?" He pulled her closer, cradling her against his chest. "You cannot protect yourself from loss by refusing to love, sweetheart. Life does not work that way. All you can do is choose to live fully, to love completely while you have the chance, and trust that it is worth the risk. I do not know if I am that brave." "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said firmly. "You have been brave every single day for 8 months. You can be brave in this too." She cried against his chest, and he held her, letting her release all the fear and grief and confusion she had been carrying. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn, wrapped in his arms, Theresa finally let herself be vulnerable. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back slightly and looked up at him. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she admitted, her voice shaking. "And it terrifies me." His heart soared. "That is okay, we can be terrified together." She laughed, a watery sound, and then, before he could react, she lifted her face and kissed him. It was tentative at first, testing, but when he responded, pulling her closer and deepening the kiss, she melted against him. It was sweet and desperate and full of all the things they had been holding back from saying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theresa touched his face gently. "So what happens now? Now I ask you again, properly this time." Garrett took both her hands in his, looking into her eyes. "Theresa Valdez, will you marry me? Not because of some impulsive declaration in the street, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you. I want to work this ranch by your side. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to face whatever comes with you as my partner and my wife. Will you marry me?" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Garrett Ashford." He kissed her again, and the rain continued to fall, breaking the long dry spell and soaking into the grateful earth. When they finally made a run for the house through the downpour, they were laughing like children, soaked through and deliriously happy. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Abiquiu. Father Domingo performed the service, beaming with satisfaction at having witnessed their courtship from the beginning. The whole town turned out, curious and supportive in equal measure. The women brought food for a celebration afterward, and the men clapped Garrett on the back, welcoming him officially to the community. Theresa wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar that had belonged to her mother. She looked radiant, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes shining with happiness. When Garrett saw her walking toward him down the aisle of the small church, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. This remarkable woman had agreed to be his wife, to trust him with her heart and her life. He would spend every day proving himself worthy of that trust. They exchanged vows in front of the whole community, promising to love and honor each other in good times and bad. When Father Domingo pronounced them husband and wife and Garrett kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was joyful and loud, with music and dancing and too much food. Garrett found himself pulled into conversations with ranchers who wanted to give him advice, farmers who welcomed him to the area, and older women who told Theresa she had chosen well. Everyone seemed genuinely happy for them, and Garrett realized this was what community felt like. He had been alone for so long, moving from place to place, never putting down roots. Now he had a wife, a home, and neighbors who cared. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. As evening fell and the celebration began to wind down, Garrett and Theresa slipped away to ride back to the ranch that was now officially theirs together. They rode side by side under a sky full of stars, not speaking much, just enjoying the comfortable silence and the knowledge that they were heading home together. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Garrett loved his wife with gentleness and reverence, awed by her trust in him. She responded with passion that surprised and delighted him, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, he felt a sense of peace and belonging he had never experienced before. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "I love you too," she replied, her hand over his heart. "Thank you for being patient enough to let me find my way to you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Garrett's last thought before sleep claimed him was that he was the luckiest man alive. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. With two of them working together, tasks that had been overwhelming for Theresa alone became manageable. Garrett brought in money from selling some of his own cattle he had been keeping at a holding ranch in Texas, and they used it to pay down some of the remaining debts. Gradually, the financial pressure eased, but it was not just about work and money. They built a life together. Theresa taught Garrett to cook the new Mexican dishes she had grown up eating, and he surprised her with Texas recipes his mother had taught him. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking about their days and making plans for the future. They wanted to expand the herd, maybe add some horses for breeding. They talked about building an addition onto the house eventually, when they could afford it. The intimacy between them deepened. Garrett learned what made his wife laugh, what made her thoughtful, what made her melt into his arms. He learned to read her moods, to know when she needed space to work through something, and when she needed him to hold her. Theresa, in turn, learned that beneath Garrett's confident exterior was a man who sometimes doubted himself, who worried about being good enough, who carried grief for his parents that he rarely showed. She learned to see past his easy smile to the deeper emotions beneath. They had their first real argument about 4 months into their marriage. Garrett wanted to invest in breeding stock that would improve their herd quality, but it would require spending a significant amount of money. Theresa, scarred by her first husband's financial recklessness, was hesitant to take the risk. "I know it seems like a lot," Garrett argued, frustration creeping into his voice, "but it will pay off in the long run. Better breeding means better cattle means better prices." "And what if something goes wrong?" Theresa countered. "What if the cattle get sick? What if there is a drought and we cannot feed them? We cannot afford to gamble like this." "It is not gambling, it is investing in our future." "That is what he used to say," Theresa said quietly, and Garrett realized with a sinking feeling that she was talking about her first husband. "He always had a plan that was going to make us rich, and every plan left us more in debt." Garrett took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "Theresa, I am not him. I know you are scared and I understand why, but you have to trust that I am being practical here. I have done the math. I have talked to other ranchers. This is sound business, not a pipe dream." "How can I be sure?" she asked, and there was real fear in her voice. "How do I know this will not be the start of us losing everything?" He crossed to her and took her hands. "Because we are in this together. Because I promise I will never make a major decision without talking to you first. Because if you have real concerns, I want to hear them and we can adjust the plan. But you have to meet me halfway here. You have to be willing to trust me, just as I trust you." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right, but we start small. We buy 2 breeding bulls, not the 4 you wanted. We see how it goes, and if it works out, we expand next year." It was a compromise, and Garrett accepted it gratefully. "That sounds fair." They bought the bulls, and Theresa's caution proved wise when one of them turned out to be more aggressive than expected and had to be sold off quickly. But the other bull was excellent, and the following spring, They had calves that were noticeably stronger and healthier than previous years. When they sold them, they got premium prices, and Garrett made sure Theresa knew that her prudent approach had made the difference between a good investment and a potential disaster. "You were right to push back," he told her. "I get excited about possibilities sometimes and do not always think through the risks. I need you to balance that out." She kissed him softly. "And I need you to remind me that sometimes taking calculated risks is how we grow. We make a good team." "The best," he agreed. As their first year of marriage turned into their second, Theresa began to hope for something she had been afraid to want: a child. She and her first husband had never conceived, and she had wondered if perhaps she was unable to. But as months passed with Garrett, she found herself dreaming of holding a baby, of watching him be a father. When she finally told Garrett she was pregnant, he picked her up and spun her around, his joy so pure and unrestrained that it made her laugh and cry at the same time. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating, his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. The heat that summer was brutal, and Theresa struggled with morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoons. Garrett became fiercely protective, insisting she rest more and taking on extra work to spare her. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated like she was fragile, but eventually she accepted that he just wanted to take care of her and their growing child. As her belly swelled, Garrett would talk to the baby, telling their unborn child stories about their ranch, about the stars in the desert sky, about how loved and wanted they were. Theresa would lie with her head on his chest, his hand on her stomach, feeling completely safe and cherished. The baby came on a cold January night in 1884. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Garrett feared he might lose both his wife and child. The midwife from town, an experienced woman named Rosa, worked tirelessly, and Father Domingo came to pray with them. Garrett held Theresa's hand through it all, whispering encouragement and love even when she was too exhausted to respond. Finally, as dawn was breaking, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, his lungs strong and healthy, and Garrett felt tears streaming down his face as Rosa placed the tiny, squirming bundle into Theresa's arms. "He is perfect," Theresa whispered, examining every finger and toe. "Look at him, Garrett. We made him." "You did the hard part," Garrett said, kissing her sweaty forehead. "You were so strong, sweetheart. I am so proud of you." They named him Garrett Ashford, and he became the center of their world. Garrett had never known he could love someone so completely and immediately. Watching Theresa nurse their son, seeing her smile down at Gabriel with such tenderness, made his heart ache with happiness. Life became exponentially busier with a baby, but they navigated it together. Garrett would take Gabriel in the early mornings, letting Theresa sleep a little longer after nights of frequent feedings. He would walk around the ranch with his son against his chest, talking to him about the cattle, the land, the sky. Gabriel would stare up at him with dark eyes that looked just like his mother's, and Garrett would feel overwhelmed by the responsibility and privilege of being this child's father. As Gabriel grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerged. He was curious about everything, fearless in a way that gave his parents heart attacks regularly. He would chase chickens, try to pet the cattle, and climb anything he could get his hands on. He adored horses and would stand at the corral fence for hours, watching them with rapt attention. "He is going to be a handful," Theresa said one afternoon, watching their 3-year-old son attempt to lasso a fence post with a piece of rope. "He is his mother's son," Garrett replied with a grin. "Determined and stubborn and completely sure he can do anything he sets his mind to." "He gets that from you too," she pointed out, but she was smiling. When Gabriel was 4, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1888 they welcomed a daughter they named Grace. She was smaller than Gabriel had been, with her father's lighter coloring and a disposition that was remarkably calm. Where Gabriel had been fussy and demanding, Grace was content to observe the world quietly. Their family felt complete. Gabriel doted on his baby sister, showing her his treasures and trying to teach her things far beyond her baby comprehension. Garrett would find his son sitting next to Grace's cradle, talking to her seriously about important 4-year-old matters, and his heart would swell with love for both of them. The ranch prospered. With Garrett's business sense and Theresa's practical nature keeping them balanced, they made smart decisions that paid off. They expanded their herd carefully, bought additional land when a neighbor decided to sell, and built a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. Garrett became respected in the community, serving on the town council and helping to mediate disputes between ranchers. Theresa bloomed in their marriage. The hard edges that grief and struggle had given her softened, though her strength never diminished. She was active in the church, helped other women in the community when they needed it, and became known for her generosity. The shy smiles she had given Garrett in their courtship became ready laughter that rang through their home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. Gabriel and Grace were inside, supposedly going to bed but more likely playing when they thought their parents could not hear them. "You remember the shooting contest?" Theresa asked, leaning against Garrett's shoulder. "How could I forget?" He put his arm around her. "I made a complete fool of myself in front of the entire town." "You were very bold," she agreed. "When you said marry me now, I thought you had lost your mind." "Maybe I had," he said. "Or maybe I just recognized something my heart knew before my head caught up. Either way, it was the best decision I ever made." She turned to look at him, and in her eyes, he saw all the love and trust and partnership they had built over the past decade. "The best decision I ever made was saying yes. Well, eventually saying yes." He laughed and kissed her. "Worth the wait." "Speaking of waiting," she said, a familiar teasing note in her voice. "How long do you think before Gabriel tries to sneak out of his room?" As if on cue, they heard the creak of a floorboard inside. Garrett sighed. "I will go round them up." "No, let me," Theresa said, standing. "You stay here and enjoy the evening. I will be right back." He watched her go inside, listened to the sound of her voice gently but firmly directing their children back to bed, heard the eventual quiet that meant she had succeeded. When she returned, she settled back into his arms with a contented sigh. "They are getting so big," she murmured. "Gabriel will be 11 soon. Grace is already 7. Where does the time go?" "Too fast," Garrett agreed. "But we still have plenty of years ahead of us. Years to watch them grow up to be grandparents eventually, to keep building this life we have made." "You still do not regret it?" she asked. "Sometimes I wonder if you ever wish you had kept traveling, stayed free instead of settling down with a difficult widow and all her problems." He tightened his arms around her. "Not once, not for a single moment. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. A home, a family, a purpose. I was just drifting before I met you. You anchored me, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I never thought I could be this happy again. After losing my first husband, I thought that part of my life was over. But you showed me that the heart has infinite capacity for love if we are just brave enough to let it happen." "We were both brave," he said. "You were brave enough to give me a chance, and I was brave enough to ask for one." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and one of their horses answered with a soft whinny. The desert night was alive with sound and movement, but here on their porch, wrapped in each other's arms, there was only peace. "I love you, Garrett Ashford," Theresa said softly. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." "I love you too, Theresa Ashford," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Forever and always." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Gabriel grew into a young man who inherited his mother's skill with a rifle and his father's head for business. He was already talking about expanding into horse breeding, showing the same entrepreneurial spirit his parents had brought to their cattle operation. Grace developed a love for learning and would spend hours reading every book she could get her hands on. Theresa and Garrett supported both their children's dreams, knowing that whatever paths they chose, they had been raised with love and strong values. When Gabriel turned 18 in 1897, he announced he wanted to attend university in Santa Fe to study agriculture and modern ranching techniques. It was a bold plan, and it meant he would be away from home, but Garrett and Theresa supported him completely. They had raised him to think for himself, to be ambitious, and they were proud to see him reaching for more. Grace, at 14, had decided she wanted to be a teacher. She was already helping at the small school in Abiquiu, working with younger children and showing a natural gift for education. Theresa sometimes wondered where this scholarly child had come from, but Garrett reminded her that both of them had valued education and had made sure their children understood its importance. With the children growing more independent, Garrett and Theresa found themselves rediscovering the quiet intimacy of their early marriage. They would take long rides across their land, just the two of them, talking about everything and nothing. They worked side by side during the day and fell into bed together at night, their lovemaking still passionate despite the years that had passed. "We should take a trip," Garrett suggested one evening. They were lying in bed, the windows open to let in the cool night air. "Maybe go to California, see the ocean. We have never taken a real honeymoon." "After 15 years of marriage," Theresa laughed, "is not it a bit late for a honeymoon?" "It is never too late," he insisted. "Gabriel can manage the ranch for a few weeks with help from the hands we have hired. Grace can stay with Rosa in town. We could have an adventure, just the two of us." She rolled over to face him, her eyes bright with interest. "You are serious?" "Completely serious. We have worked hard for 15 years building this ranch and raising our children. I think we have earned some time just for us." "The ocean," she said thoughtfully. "I have always wanted to see it." "Then let us go see it. This fall, after the cattle are sold, we will have a little extra money and it will be cooler for traveling." They did exactly that. In October of 1897, Garrett and Theresa took the train west to California, leaving their children and ranch in capable hands. It was strange and wonderful to be just the two of them again, without responsibilities or schedules dictating their days. They spent 2 weeks exploring San Francisco, walking along the beach, eating in restaurants where someone else did the cooking, staying in a hotel where they could be completely anonymous and completely focused on each other. They acted like young lovers, holding hands in public, stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking, talking until late into the night about their dreams and memories. Standing on the beach one evening watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Theresa turned to Garrett with tears in her eyes. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong," she said, smiling through the tears. "I am just so happy. I never imagined my life could be this full, this rich. And it is all because you had the courage to say marry me now to a stubborn widow who thought she did not want to love again. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Best decision I ever made. And I would make it again 1,000 times over. They returned home refreshed and reconnected, ready to face whatever came next. Gabriel came home from university for holidays, full of ideas for improving the ranch. Grace continued to excel in her studies and her teaching work. The ranch continued to prosper, and Garrett and Theresa found themselves in the comfortable position of being secure financially for the first time in their lives. As the new century approached, they threw a big party at the ranch to celebrate not just the turn of the century, but also their 16 years of marriage and the life they had built together. Friends and neighbors came from all over the area, bringing food and music and laughter. Gabriel was home from school, and Grace helped organize everything, showing the same competence her mother had always possessed. At midnight, when the calendar turned to 1900, Garrett raised his glass in a toast. To my wife, who took a chance on a foolish cowboy who did not know when to keep his mouth shut. To my children, who make me proud every single day. To our friends and neighbors who have become family. And to the future, which I believe will be even brighter than the past. Everyone cheered and drank, and then the music started again and people danced under the stars. Garrett swept Theresa into his arms, and they moved together to the fiddle music, as comfortable with each other as they had been that night in the barn during the rainstorm so many years ago. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Garrett murmured in her ear. "Not in the last hour," she replied with a smile. "I was starting to worry." "I love you," he said, serious now. "More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." She looked up at him, and in the firelight, he saw the girl who had beaten him in a shooting contest and the woman who had built a life with him, all mixed together in the face he loved more than any other. "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for making me believe in second chances." They danced until the fire burned low and the guests began to drift away. Finally, it was just the four of them, Garrett and Theresa and their 2 children, standing together under the vast New Mexico sky. "This is a good life," Gabriel said quietly, looking around at the ranch that would one day be his responsibility. "It is," Grace agreed. "We are very lucky." "We are," Theresa confirmed, leaning against Garrett's side. "Very lucky indeed." The years continued their steady march forward. Gabriel graduated from university and returned home, full of modern ideas that he implemented carefully, respecting the foundation his parents had built while bringing innovations that made the ranch even more successful. He married a smart, capable woman named Sarah who fit into the family perfectly, and gave Garrett and Theresa their first grandchildren. Grace finished her education and became the head teacher at the Abiquiu school, respected throughout the territory for her dedication and skill. She eventually married a doctor who had come west to practice medicine in the small towns that needed it desperately. They had 2 children of their own and stayed close to home, which delighted Theresa. As Garrett and Theresa moved into their 50s and then 60s, they gradually handed over more of the ranch work to Gabriel and his family, though neither of them ever fully retired. Garrett would still ride out to check on the cattle most mornings, and Theresa still kept the books and made major decisions alongside their son. They were sitting on their porch one evening in 1910, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, when Theresa said, "Do you remember what you said to me after I won that shooting contest?" Garrett, now 54 years old with gray threading through his hair, smiled. "I believe I said marry me now, much to the shock of everyone present, including myself." "You did," she confirmed. She was 52, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with age but still beautiful to him. "Everyone thought you were crazy." "I probably was," he admitted. "But it was the best kind of crazy." 28 years, she marveled. "We have been married 28 years. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday." "Both," he agreed. "We have lived a whole lifetime together, and yet I still feel like we are just getting started." One of their grandchildren, Gabriel's oldest son, came running up to the porch. "Grandma, Grandpa, come play with us." Theresa laughed. "I think we are a bit old for running around, sweetheart." "You are not old," the boy protested. "You can still do anything." Garrett caught Theresa's eye and they shared a smile. "Well, when you put it that way," he said, standing up and offering his hand to his wife. "Shall we show them how it is done?" They spent the next hour playing with their grandchildren, and while their movements were slower and they tired more easily than they once had, the joy was just as real as it had ever been. When they finally begged off and returned to the porch, breathless and laughing, they sat close together watching the children continue their games. "A good life," Theresa said softly, echoing what Gabriel had said all those years ago at the turn of the century. "The best life," Garrett corrected. "Because I spent it with you." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I am glad you were bold enough to propose to me in the middle of the street in front of half the town. I am glad you were brave enough to give me a chance to prove myself worthy of you. You proved that a long time ago," she said. "About 1,000 times over." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold across the western sky. The desert stretched out around them, beautiful and harsh and home. Their ranch, built through hard work and love, thrived under their son's care. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them with joy. And through it all, the partnership they had forged that day so long ago remained the foundation on which everything else was built. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Garrett pulled Theresa closer. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched the night come alive together, just as they had done thousands of times before and would, God willing, do thousands of times more. Because 28 years ago, a cowboy had been foolish and brave enough to propose marriage to a widow who had beaten him in a shooting contest, and she had been even braver to say yes. And from that moment of courage and hope, a love story had unfolded that would last them the rest of their lives, a testament to the power of taking chances, believing in second opportunities, and fighting for happiness even when the odds seemed impossible. Their grandchildren's laughter floated across the evening air, mixing with the sounds of the desert night. Inside the house, lights glowed warm and welcoming. Somewhere on the ranch, cattle lowed softly and horses moved peacefully in their corrals. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, starting with the most important choice of all: to love each other completely and without reservation. "What are you thinking about?" Theresa asked, feeling Garrett's chest rise and fall with a deep breath. "Just that if I had to live my life over again, I would not change a single thing," he said. "Well, maybe I would have practiced my shooting a bit more before that contest." She laughed, the sound still as beautiful to him as it had been nearly 3 decades ago. "You did not stand a chance against me that day. I grew up with a rifle in my hands." "I know that now," he said ruefully, "but my pride was wounded at the time." "Your pride recovered quickly enough to propose marriage. Some things are worth swallowing your pride for," he said seriously. "You were definitely one of those things." She lifted her head to kiss him gently. "We were both lucky that day. You were brave enough to speak up and I was ready to listen. Timing is everything." Timing and a good shooting contest, he agreed with a grin. As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the routines of a couple who had shared a home and a life for decades, Garrett watched his wife brush her silver-streaked hair and felt the same surge of love he had felt the first time she smiled at him. Time had changed their bodies and their circumstances, but the essential truth of what they meant to each other remained constant. "I love you," he said, as she climbed into bed beside him. "I love you too," she replied, settling into his arms with a contented sigh. They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, dreaming of the past they had shared and the future that still stretched before them. Outside, the New Mexico night was alive with stars and possibilities, the same stars that had watched over them on their wedding night, on the nights their children were born, on all the ordinary and extraordinary nights that had made up the fabric of their marriage. And somewhere in the cosmos, if such things could be measured, the universe smiled on the cowboy who had been bold enough to say, "Marry me now," and the widow who had been brave enough to eventually say yes, because theirs was a love story that proved second chances were real, that courage could change everything, and that sometimes the best decisions were made in moments of absolute, terrifying, glorious certainty. The ranch they had built together would stand for generations, a testament to their hard work and vision. The children they had raised would carry forward the values of integrity, courage, and love that their parents had modeled every single day. And the love story that had begun with a shooting contest and an impulsive proposal would become the kind of legend that gets told around fires and kitchen tables, inspiring others to be brave, to take chances, and to believe that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Because in the end, Garrett and Theresa had not just built a successful ranch or raised wonderful children. They had created something even more valuable, a partnership based on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a love that grew stronger with each passing year. They had taken the broken pieces of their individual pasts and forged them into a beautiful shared future, proving that it is never too late for a new beginning, and that sometimes the greatest adventures start with a single moment of courage. As dawn broke over the ranch the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Garrett woke first as he always did. He looked at his wife sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the early light, and felt the same wonder he had felt for 28 years. How had he gotten so lucky? How had he been given the gift of this extraordinary woman and the life they had built together? He did not have answers to those questions, but he did not need them. All he needed was right here, his wife, his family, his home. The cowboy who had ridden into Abiquiu all those years ago looking for honest work had found so much more. He had found purpose, belonging, and a love that would sustain him for the rest of his days. Theresa stirred beside him, her eyes opening slowly. When she saw him watching her, she smiled, and his heart still skipped a beat at the sight. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, my love," he replied, kissing her softly. "Ready for another day, with you, always." And so they rose to face another day together, as they had done for 28 years, and would continue to do for all the years to come. Their story, which had begun with a challenge and a proposal, continued to unfold with each sunrise, each shared meal, each quiet moment on the porch watching the desert sky. It was not a story of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started with both. It was a story of two people choosing each other every single day, through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, through all the beautiful mundane moments that make up a life. And that, perhaps, was the greatest love story of all, the end.